Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Glad you all could be here. I'm Skip Rutherford, Dean of the Clinton School, and welcome to the 27th Frank and Kula Kumpuris Lecture, hosted by the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton School. Our special thanks to Dean, to Drew, Catherine Ann for making this series possible in honor of your parents. We are grateful. We appreciate the support of AT&T and the many volunteers from the foundation, the school, and others who are here helping us. We're also honored to have Dr. Don Bobbitt, the president of the University of Arkansas System here. Dr. Bobbitt, you've been busy. Tonight's program is a real treat. Remarks by the President of Liberia, followed by her conversation with President Clinton. Mr. President, it's always good to have you here. And thanks to you, the Clinton Library and the Clinton School, in addition to their educational and public service initiatives, continue to be catalysts in the renaissance of downtown Little Rock. Nobel Prize winner Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is the 24th president of Liberia and the first elected woman head of state in Africa. She is now completing her second and final term of office. After decades of advocating for freedom, justice, and equality, President Sirleaf received the 2011 Nobel Prize for nonviolent struggle for the safety of women and for women's rights to full participation in peace-building work. As president, she has led the effort to rebuild post-Liberia, post-conflict Liberia. She has been ranked among the 10 best leaders of the world, among the top 100 most powerful women in the world, and the first most powerful woman in Africa. With honorary degrees from Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, Dartmouth, Brown, Spelman, and many others, she is the recipient of our country's Presidential Medal of Freedom and is the author of the critically acclaimed memoir, This Child Will Be Great. A proud mother of 4 sons, grandmother of 11, please join me in welcoming the President of Liberia, the Honorable Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. President, the Kumpuris family, whom I just met, Mr. Skip Rutherford, the Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service, our event coordinator, Yana Chanel Scott, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you warm greetings from the people of Liberia, and on their behalf, would like to express thanks and appreciation to you, Mr. President, and also to Madam Secretary for the support that you have given to our country. We recall with fondness the visits you both made and the friendships you established. We note particularly the strong support which our country received when we faced one of the most dramatic public health crises in the 21st century. The three countries most affected, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, face major challenges that threaten the fabric of our health system and impacted global public health in a manner never experienced before. Some of you may recall the confusion and the fear faced by residents of that city when a Liberian in the midst of the epidemic returned to his family in Dallas, Texas. Memories fade, and in our case, we too are beginning to put the past behind us. But we must always remain mindful of the experience that might have touched the world. The horrifying disease caused panic, as was seen on television screens around the world. As president of Liberia, I was on the forefront, searching every avenue to find quick and effective means of averting the devastating impact of this global threat that had my country at its epicenter. In the midst of debts, fears, sanctions, exodus of investors, diplomats, companies, citizens, friends, and the closure of schools and markets, and the confused cries of our people, my leadership was on the line. I mobilized the country, the leadership of all three branches of government, the churches, the business community, civil society, all of whom joined in the fight. I strongly rejected the horrifying prediction that the three countries will face 6 million infections before the end of January 2014, and 20,000 of our citizens would die within months. I canceled my participation in the long-awaited and historic meeting with President Obama and African heads of states in August 2014 in Washington, D.C. Our initial response to the crisis was to constrain the movement of people, which led to confrontation with security forces and the unfortunate death of one of our young citizens. We were saddened by the experience and knew that our response required a different approach. We consulted, acknowledged our mistakes, and realized that unless the disease was construed as not affecting the individual, but the family and the community in profound and tragic ways, our intervention approach would remain ineffective. We were mindful that community organizations had not been meaningfully woven into the different interventions. Local caregiving and burial practices had not been considered in the response. The strong, close emotional ties that bind families, neighbors, and communities together were also not factored into the original intervention process. In similar manner, initially, communities were distrustful and did not respond positively to our proposed intervention because from their own perspective, the messages were not productive and was difficult to comprehend given their own cultural practices. For example, don't shake hands, no hugging, don't touch dead bodies, made no sense to people in an environment where touching, shaking hands, preparing the dead for burials performing certain rituals were customary. We changed our approach and called on all our people, our leaders, our communities, to take charge, to take prime responsibility to save their lives and their livelihoods. I visited hospitals and clinics to dampen fears and bring hope to the health professionals who, in taking charge to save our people, died themselves in the process. In the midst of mounting deaths and fear of transmission, in the lack of safe burial practices, I took the boldest and most risky decision by ordering the cremation of dead, something totally alien to our culture. In our grief, I reached out to President Obama and to the United States. He responded with support of the US Army, the Center for Disease Control, the National Institute of Health. I reached out to bilateral and multilateral partners, and they responded. I wrote a letter to the world pointing out that this was a fight in which the whole world had a stake. The disease would respect no borders. The damage caused would reverberate across the world. The world responded, including hundreds of young Africans from 7 countries who came to join in our fight. More importantly, our communities responded. Community leaders empowered local leaders to engage their communities and encourage them to avoid the dead, to fight fear and panic, and immediately report all suspected cases to community leaders. As key influencers in their respective communities, they were best suited to promote awareness, encourage preventive measures and abstinence from dangerous and unhealthy activities. Women featured prominently in domestic surveillance by monitoring the illness and physical wellness of family members for symptoms of the disease. They fed children, their spouses and elderly, and cared for the sick generally. Traditional leaders and religious leaders also played a role in the process while minimizing their physical contact. We had national heroes. Dr. Jerry Brown, who was featured in a Time magazine story. A nurse who was able to treat a lot of people by simply putting plastic bags on her hands to avoid having to get contaminated herself. The change brought a desired result. The transmission was brought to a halt, well before time expected, and ultimately to elimination. I want to say a word about the Clinton Health Access Initiative. CHAR had worked alongside our government to build a supply chain for life-saving drugs, create a laboratory system, improve maternal and reproductive health, upgrade essential health infrastructure, and train and grow Liberia's health workforce. Even when Ebola struck, the CHAR country director and team continued, unlike others who fled the country, continued to work alongside our Ministry of Health throughout the national response. Through the support of the Clinton Global Initiative, Liberia received in September 14 the largest individual donation of supplies. We'd like to thank you, Mr. President. We are pleased that President Clinton visited and personally led a discussion among community workers who were key stakeholders in promoting a resilient health system. This was not his first visit. He had been there before, and he has sat among students, talking to them about education, about the pursuit of profession. This was something that all of our students today, now professionals, reflect upon that visit and the opportunity they had for an interaction and a discussion with President Clinton. Liberia was declared Ebola-free in May 2015, but it took a year or more to build the confidence that led to the return of investors and partners in development and in citizens. Today, post-preparedness remains the next challenge to overcome. We are gradually building the requisite infrastructure, improving our laboratories, infection control measures, and enhancing surveillance and early warning systems. An ongoing initiative, Last Mile Health, under the direction of Dr. Raj Punjabi, aims at training 4,000 community health assistants as first responders. There is still more to be done to improve the public health system throughout the country. With the experience of the past, we need to do more to ensure community participation, not only in service delivery, but advocacy and planning. There is still a bigger challenge. The fears of the disease are fading into memory, but the devastating effect on our economy remains. Liberia was hit just as it was bouncing back, and efforts were underway to address the shocks of declining global prices for our main exports. It will likely take the next 5 years to return to the banner year of 9.5% growth that was experienced in 2013. We are confident, however, that recovery is well underway, with growth already close to 3% and on a positive trajectory. I know that many of you in this room would like me to talk about my life's journey. It has been one of tragedy and triumphs. I, with 3 siblings, grew up in a family that represents the complexity of a nation founded by emancipated slaves who sought freedom and justice, but failing to integrate, they denied the host indigenous population their rights and freedoms, which they sought. My father was the son of a tribal chief whose name was changed to the name of settlers. My paternal grandmother, who remained in the village poor and illiterate until her death. My father was sent to live with a settler family to obtain an education and ultimately became the first indigenous member of our national legislature. My mother was the daughter of an indigenous rural illiterate market woman and an expelled German trader who lived in the rural city of her birth with occasional visit to families in the capital city. She too was given and later adopted by a settler family who ensured her education, which led her to become a teacher. Our family fared well, going back during school vacation to the village of my father where my grandmother lived. I averred respect for my father's admonition that we should never forget our roots. The life and comfort to which we had become accustomed came to an end when my father became paralyzed and later died. Our mother, a teacher and later a preacher, took on the task through various hard work, income earning means to keep 4 children and several wards in school. I was married right after high school at 17 years old, and in 4 years, had 4 sons, one of whom is here. My husband was a young Liberian who had returned home after earning a college degree in the United States. As I took on the hard task of family life with a limited education and 4 sons to raise, my classmates proceeded to obtain a college education. I recovered, and I too sought an education. I was able to go back to school to obtain a college degree, to return to start professional work. It did cause a problem in the marriage, but I succeeded as a professional. The story of my life remains the greatest motivation for my success and achievement. My encounter with great African leaders, such as Malemo Julius Nyerere, Nelson and Winnie Mandela, provided the inspiration to keep moving up the political ladder. My interaction with the market women throughout West Africa, particularly in my home country, Liberia, with the activist women in Southern Africa, strengthened my resolve to tackle the biggest challenge, to go for the presidency, to break the glass ceiling by becoming the first democratically elected woman president in Africa. As I prepare to leave the presidency in a couple of weeks, following the dictates of our Constitution, I have worked consistently in many roles, very low, very high. I have been blessed throughout this period with relatively good health, a host of good family, friends, and well-wishers. My plans for the future are therefore modest. I look forward to spending time at the farm I have developed in the village of my father. I also look forward to sharing my experience with audiences of women and young through lectures and speeches. I will continue the process of working with leaders and the people of Liberia to complete the transformation of my village and my country. Best of all, I've been blessed by God to have enabled me to achieve what I have. And I thank you for being here to listen to me.
Oh, God, you were wonderful.
Anyway, you tell me. Okay.
So, you see why she won. I'd like to begin by saying that your son who is here, Dr. James Sirleaf, is now a physician in Columbus, Georgia, who told me he spent a fair amount of time trying to explain to people why it would be a really dumb idea to repeal the health care law. So, I say that because you spent a fair amount of time, and I thank you very much, telling your life story and tying it to the roots of Liberia. Many Americans know that former slaves went to the country and helped to found it as the nation it is today. Not many know that it was not free of conflict, and a lot of the native peoples were not treated particularly fairly. So you have contributed already to our knowledge. When you became president, the country had already gone through all these years of conflict. You had been politically persecuted yourself. I thought we Americans had a special obligation to try to help build the country. And when I came to visit you, as you pointed out, I thought, well, she's going to want me to fix the electrical system, give electricity to everybody, even to power chips. She said, no, first you must come to see the university students. Now, this will tell you a lot about her. At that time, even in the capital, Monrovia, only 20% of the homes had electricity at night. And she asked me to see the university students in the government building where her office was because the power was on all the time. But every one of these young people looked like they had just walked out of a new clothing store. They were well dressed, they were proud, and they were as informed as any group of young people I've talked to. So I would like to follow up on the ground you laid. Americans have become increasingly involved with places that have been through trouble where we have far fewer obligations than I think we do to Liberia. There are Americans still involved in Haiti, for example, all these years after the earthquake. There are a fair number of people from this community who are still involved in Rwanda all these years after the genocide. So what can you tell them about Liberia and what they can expect? And if somebody here wants to help in some way, large or small, how can they best do it?
Well, one of the weakest areas of our recovery is education. And that's because during the periods of conflict, most of the trained teachers left the country. The students were taught by volunteers, many of them unqualified, good hearts, no doubt, but not able to teach the children. Today, we now have 2 million children in school all over the country, but we don't have teachers. We've built the schools, but the schools are not properly manned because we don't have teachers. What could people do? We reach out, we look. I hope we could find retired teachers who would be willing to spend a few months, maybe a couple of years, working with some of our students. We have a long history of religious schools. We have Catholic schools, Methodist schools, Episcopal schools, and they help. And there was a time we had missionaries that came out, and they did most of the teaching in the rural areas, which made a major contribution. But right now, having already had 15 consecutive years of peace, something our country has not had in the past 30 years, that's what we've brought to it. But the children are so many, and the teachers are so few.
Let me ask, just to fill in the blanks here, one of the things we didn't say explicitly is there was basically 14 years of intense civil conflict. So President Sirleaf gets elected, and she has a few years and produces 9% growth, and we're rocking along, and she's got us and a lot of other people there helping, and we're tackling AIDS, tuberculosis, helping to build out a national health care system, and boom, the Ebola epidemic happened. And I'm grateful for what you said about the people from our foundation. 4 of them never left, not a single day.
That's right.
And I thank God that none of them were infected.
Yeah.
But they could have been. They could have lost their lives, and they knew it, and they stayed anyway. And I'm very grateful for that. And but now we have to build. So let me ask you a very specific question. Suppose there were a movement in America to try to enlist retired teachers who were properly certified and seated in the classroom to come there and, let's say, give a year teaching. Could they be permitted to teach in your schools? How would we do that?
Absolutely, because our school system is patterned after the U.S. school system. Until recently, when we've been having production of local books, most of the books came from here. So there were many times some rural child would be reading about ice and snow and didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But that's changing with the communication revolution now. Now, you know, the kids see everything. They all have these phones, and they all do Twitter and.
It's also a good place for new investment. You'd be amazed how many middle-class people up and down Northwest Africa like to come to the ocean there. And Bob Johnson, bless his heart, built a couple of hotels there after President Sirleaf became president. One a resort and one on the way down to Monrovia from the airport,
Yeah.
so business people would have a place to stay when they were trying to figure out whether they can invest and start something. But there's a lot of opportunities there. So the most important thing we could do is raise a bunch of teachers to come and help you until you can educate your own.
That would be very helpful. We have some contribution. Nigeria does a little bit of that now, but we really could use some teaching assistants. We're building we've reactivated our own teacher training institute, so it's beginning to work, but you know, it takes time to train teachers and to train them with the right qualification and properly. We have to send many of them to be trained at the higher levels abroad. Those that would man the universities and whatnot, they have to come here to earn their masters and their doctorate degrees to go back. But the real ones are really where education has the biggest impact, and has to teach the young ones so that they get the right beginnings and the right foundation. And that's where we really need.
But let me ask you this, throughout the whole country, there are enough physical structures there to educate all the kids? Do you need any schools built out in the country?
No, they're not enough. We're making a big improvement there, big expansion. But infrastructure is part of the problem. Getting into the most rural areas, you've got to have the roads to make sure you get the material in there, construction material, and get it done. So many times kids are still walking an hour or so to get to school, to get to the nearest school. But in those places where the schools are, and we've been trying to build now homes for teachers as a means of incentivizing them. Because most of them want to live in a city,
Of course.
in a city where the comforts of life. Getting them back there, we have to find a way to do that, and that's one way to do is to give them free housing. But still, they're not enough. The number of students are just exploding. They have peace right
And how
now.
many students
Education.
did you say are school age?
Right now, we have 2 million children in school.
And what's the overall total population?
4.7 million. But that tells you how young our nation is.
Yeah.
65%. 65% under 30
18 and
there.
under.
Yes, 30 and under.
Part of that's because so many older people died in those 14 years too. So it's great. But the point is, this is a country where the United States could make a big difference. There aren't all that many more people than there are in Arkansas. And it's a country with roots that we share, and sins that we share, and possibilities that we share. Let me ask you another question. How many doctors are there in Liberia?
About 50. Am I right? That's another big area where we just don't have enough to serve the population. In the health sector is another.
There are 80 now. And we are trying to help them with a plan that calls for going to 260 by 2022.
That's right. That's correct.
And along with doubling the number of nurses, quintupling the number of nurse midwives, and going from almost zero to more than 10,000 community health workers. They want to stand on their own, but in the meanwhile, we need people to help. And we need partnerships. We need to do something like what we're doing in Rwanda, where we have a couple dozen medical schools and dental schools and nursing schools, and the universities involved there are sending people to train and to work and to stand in, and they agreed to work for 7 to 9% overhead, which is 25 to 30% of what most of these American NGOs charge. Liberia needs that. And so I think that's important. What about higher education? Tell how many students are in higher education there? How many have to go out of the country?
We have about, the number of universities I'm trying to calculate, I think more along the line of about 100,000 at the university level in about 4 different schools, one of them the major national university, and the other 3 church schools, different church universities. Until recently, the University of Liberia didn't have more than about 4 PhDs. And so, but right now they've been having a major training program. And so that's improved considerably now. They're more than double that, having been training over the past few years. And they've moved them up and training those in the masters, at the master's level. So it's much improved now, but we still have a lot of students over here that are still training in the different areas. And the major areas of concern are STEM, science, maths, English. But again, we got the Peace Corps back. You know, and that they have been really, truly great. They have come and specifically focusing on English, math, science. Those are the area weakest, because those are the area where the qualified teachers didn't have the right training to be able to do that. So that's a big gap for us that needs to be filled.
Are there any significant gender disparities in education?
Yes, in those areas I just mentioned. So we have the West African Examination Council that all our students in West Africa have to sit those tests at different levels at the 9th grade, 12th grade. They have to take it, and for a while it was a difficult thing to get our students to pass those exams because they lacked the laboratories in the schools for sciences and all of that. Over the years, not having proper foundation, you know, in the basics, so they could not meet the standards of others. That's improved again, but until we can infuse enough of these technical training things in those basic areas, it'll be difficult for them to compete on the level.
You told them, I don't know if everybody heard it, that you were going to go home to your farm. This is Farmer Ellen here. Don't laugh.
No, Bill, it's true.
Yeah, she's a real farmer. So talk to us about agriculture there. What do the farmers need? How many are there? What else can we do? to increase food production? And are you self-sufficient in food? Does anybody there produce anything that's exported out of Liberia?
Well, first of all, you know, Liberia is a forest country.
Well, you can
We
include
have
that too.
42% of the biodiversity in the region. So because of the rainfall, you know, we have the rainiest capital city in the world. And so rubber has been one of our major things. With Firestone. Firestone has been there all these years. Forestry has been, but forestry now because of the trying to control the emission of gases and whatnot, we have to cut down on our forest operations to conserve the forests. We also do what most of West Africa does: coffee, cocoa. In terms of food security, we have rice is our main staple. We're still not fully self-sufficient in rice. We still import rice. But when it comes, we're still exporting, and we're a mineral country too, you know. Iron ore was our main thing. Gold and diamond, those are the main export things that are now beginning to be active again. Food security, what we're doing is making sure that people eat what they grow. And so most of the farmers are planting the basic staples. Vegetable, we're a tropical country, so planting vegetables and things are great. I do that on my farm myself. So.
Yeah, what do you farm? What do you
Rice, cassava, mangoes, in terms of vegetable, peppers, okras, eggplants, all those things.
You could become a cult figure in Arkansas if you grew enough okra. No, but I'm saying this. See, this is something else where people in this state could be of help. We grow about 40% of America's rice crop in this little state. And we do a lot of other things, but I think it's very important to maximize the capacity of African farmers to secure yields on the lands they now have, both to preserve the forests that still stand and to keep countries from being taken over by wealthy countries who have plenty of money and can't feed themselves. Because there's a big move around the world to try to come in and either rent farmland away from Africans or buy it outright, come in and mechanize it, use up the topsoil in a couple of years and go on somewhere else. We need to be supporting farmers like her. And we can do this.
But, you know, Bill, the farming thing is real. I do have a farm, but also there's a bigger job at hand. I've still got to go out there and make sure that I elect two or three other women in Africa to be president.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Tell me, one of the things you didn't say is, what impact do you think being a woman had, not on other people, but on you, on the decisions you made as president, both what you did and how you governed? That was an astonishing thing you said. To me, the most interesting thing, because we were peripherally involved, as you pointed out, in the Ebola epidemic. Most astonishing thing you did was, I never heard you describe before how you got the country to come along to changing its cultural habits. What difference did it make to you and your governance that you were a woman president? And what are you going to do in the future to make more girls think they can grow up to be president or whatever else they want to do?
Well, you know, just the fact that I guess I had the the daring and the courage to go out into clinics and go out there and take the risk. I mean, against the advice of my security, I think made a big difference to people. And being what I represent is the aspiration and expectations of women in Liberia, in Africa particularly. Other places, I dare say. There are two experiences that say, yes, being there, doing what you're doing, have changed the attitudes, the aspirations of people, the plans for people. When the head of our marketing association, when I go out there and I meet rural women and they say, thank you, you've given us a voice. Now we can sit along with the chiefs, along with the crowds, and we can speak. And so we can now take a position, we can participate in the discussions that lead to the decision in the community. And that can't change anymore. I mean, right now they're very, very focused on being a part of society and they have a voice. When I go and there's a little girl who stands there and challenges her, well, is being admonished by her principal, and she can stand up to him, which is one real case, and she stands up to him and say, don't be careful how you speak to me, a woman is president. So,
we're not so careful how we speak to each other in America. Well, that's it,
So-
but you think, but it's, so it's really, you see the difference it's making.
big difference, big difference. Even at the higher political levels. If you look at the record in Africa now, more and more women are vying for political leadership. More women. Rwanda has 64% representation in parliament, the highest in the world, not just in Africa.
And half the governors.
Yeah, I mean, it's just tremendous. The many women that are now, they're not just ministers of health or ministers of gender, ministers of education, the usual traditional ones, they're now ministers of public works. You have so many women that are prime ministers now, vice presidents, and now vying. So that's what I'm saying is, America is behind.
Yeah, and if you're really lucky, you will avoid the invasion of certain media investments, and that'll keep you on the cutting edge of change. I think, let me ask you a couple of other questions about this. Do you believe that the fact that there are so many women that have always played a heavy role in the African economy has made it somewhat easier for you to function? That is, it's like these women want to be heard now, but it's not like they weren't always most of the farmers in many countries. There are many countries where there are more women than men farmers. And there are many, and I think that every time I go to Africa, I'm always impressed that women are acutely aware, maybe because of your example and others, but they seem to be acutely aware of their responsibilities, not only to raise their children, but to try to support them if they can. And I think that makes a difference.
No, there's no doubt about it. Women, professional women, and I see even the market women as professional women. I mean, they're at the markets every day. They're farming, they're feeding their families. But women have still continued to carry the responsibility of the home. You know, whether it's for children, I mean, that's their primary attention, even as they prepare for, you know, for carrying out work functions or professional functions. And so women are just stronger than men.
If you want somebody to debate that question with you, you got to get somebody else on the stage. I agree with that, but so we've had a lot of fun, but we've also gotten some pretty clear ideas about what Americans could do to help strengthen Liberia and to participate in it in a positive way. Let me ask you a question. It's a little fluffier and not so value-laden, but it's still important. How serious is the potential to balance your economy, because it's labor-intensive, since you've got so much biodiversity, and since you are determined not to tear all your forests down, which I strongly support, also be terrible for the farmers. What is the potential of tourism, ecotourism, group tourism from places where middle-class people who wanted to come to Africa, didn't have a lot of money, could come and be at home with the language, feel comfortable in the culture, even find a church to go to on Sunday, according to you. Is there an untapped potential there that people should be looking at in terms of what helping Liberia to develop?
Liberia needs to have value addition in its major produce. We can't keep sending logs out of the country. We've got to be able to produce furniture, you know, and wood sheets and whatever, plywood and all of those. At the same time, we cannot be able to send our cocoa out. Like Cote d'Ivoire is now moving into producing chocolate from their cocoa, so is Ghana. The biggest constraint right now is infrastructure, and that means the road system, the power system. We have reconstructed our hydro. It's working now. We're now doing the transmission and distribution to get the grid power right now, doing it in homes and whatnot, but we've got to get factories. You've got to be able to have enough power to produce those things. And that's what we need the investment to now that we're getting the infrastructure coming. We're part of the West Africa infrastructure system of improving the connectivity among the West African countries, so that the road systems, you can be able to move from one country to another, the power system, the telecommunication system. And like everyone else, great effort now to put emphasis on IT, so that young people have an opportunity to innovate, to be able to come up with their own solutions to problems, and that's all beginning to happen. We need to have some partners from the U.S. to come in and work with that.
In the 4 universities, is there good broadband? Is there affordable, rapid access to the internet?
There is broadband. There is access to the internet. It hasn't worked as efficiently, but Google has just signed an understanding with us, remember, with the support of USAID, And they're starting this month, Clarence, this month. They're starting now to do the system because we've got the ACE cable that brings the cable in for being able to improve the broadband. So Google's investment is now going to make access to the internet. I think they've got about 3 countries that they're doing it. Liberia is one of them. So that's going to improve, that's going to change the landscape when that investment is finished.
Yeah, it'll bring everybody into the national economy at least, and hopefully into global awareness.
Ultimately, because they're going to do the capital cities first is easy, but the backbone, taking it into the rural area is going to take some time because of the infrastructure of getting it there.
What have I not covered? What else you want to talk about?
Again, I think some of the thing that's missing is strong advocacy for Liberia. Liberia is a long time traditional friend of America, let's put it that way. The culture, the same, even though we still have African roots and we have our African culture and African habits and African tradition and history, but still part of our overall history is very much America. Most of our people come here to school. Most of them, this is their favorite place. And so that advocacy for trying it, that's lacking between the US and Liberia as that which exists, for example, between France and the Francophone countries, or UK and Sierra Leone. The strong ties there is something we'd like to see.
I think this is really important. You know, too many Americans stop thinking about Liberia as a place to invest, a place to go and live and work for a while, a place to take a trip. It is really beautiful. Take my word for it. And the roads are better than they used to be. But they stopped thinking about it because of those 14 years that you lived through, and then because of Ebola. We were going along, everything was fine. You heard her say she got to 9.5% growth, which we would all kill for, right? And then the wheels ran off again. It's time to start thinking about this again. Americans have a special, I think, responsibility to know about the country, to know what's going on, and to help if they can. But the most important thing that I hope you see from what President Sirleaf has said today is there's a world of opportunity there which will be seized by someone. And it should be the United States. There may come a day when Africa, which has the largest amount of arable farmland still untilled on earth, which in other parts of the country is fighting Boko Haram, Ansar Dine, Al-Shabaab, will be very grateful for a stable, strong, democratic, prosperous Liberia. And so, to me, the most important thing that I was hoping would come out of this, besides having this great crowd see you and hear your story, is that there's a world of opportunity out there in this remarkable place that is big enough to make a difference and small enough to make an impact. And I think you should all think about that, each in your own way, because think what those people were looking for, those former slaves, when they hightailed it out of wherever the heck they were in bondage and made their way to Liberia. And now, because of the lives they lived, and because eventually they worked out how they were going to deal with the native people well enough to have a functioning, ongoing democracy, and they're in the middle of a hot election to see who can succeed her. You can always tell if you did a good job when somebody else wants it. We had a mayor once when I was growing up in Hot Springs who said memorable things like he'd go to, teenagers would come on little conventions of various organizations, and he'd tell them if they got a speeding ticket to come on, he'd fix it, and things like that. So he had a heart attack one day while driving down the main street of town, and his car drifted over to the curb and stopped. It took us 6 weeks to find anybody who'd agreed to file. Because he had defined the job in a way that was not particularly appealing. There are a lot of people that want her job, and they're all fighting like crazy over it. But she will be there, the country will be there. The way they dealt with this Ebola crisis, the way they buried their dead and kept fighting, was one of the most remarkable testimonies to the human spirit I have ever seen in my life. It was breathtaking. But the fact that Nigeria next door, that now nearly 200 million people, only had about 20 people die because they had a healthcare system and they didn't, and it would cost peanuts to build one, ought to make every American think, you know, there's something we can do here to make a big difference, and we should do it. So I think you've all made us think a little bigger tonight.
And I might say that we need people to help with the road building thing, and the financing is coming from the World Bank. The financing is coming from the African Development Bank, and the Chinese are winning the contracts.
Yep. Well, you know, if I say what I really think about all this, I'll be spoiling the evening. I don't want to do that. But let me say, there are enough of us to fill a lot of gaps in America and around the world. And we will be making a terrible mistake if we say we don't care if America has any influence in Asia, we don't care if America has any influence in Africa, we don't care if America has any influence in Latin America, and we don't care what happens to our neighbors south of the border. We don't want to say that. America already has a huge leg up in Liberia. So I want all of you to think about that when you leave here tonight. You don't have to be a millionaire to make a positive influence. There are networks there that will embrace any kind of positive change. We do have to figure out how to build our infrastructure out. But that's beyond the province of most people in this audience, and it doesn't take away from what we could all do in education, in healthcare, in energy, in lots of other investments. And if we get the energy up, the rest of it will come, in my opinion. And you've got, I hope, that your successors will all be looking for the same balance that you were looking for. I was hoping you'd have a big boom in new investment in a way that proved you could do it without tearing all your forests down. And I hope that your successors will see that too. She's a remarkable person, and she's been she's been a wonderful friend to Hillary and me. But we still, all the time we keep remembering, she's a real person and a lot of fun to be around. You can't forget that she is also, you know, an icon for a life well lived and a life nowhere near over. She got a lot to give, and the rest of us ought to help her give. Thank you.
Thank you, President Clinton, and thank you, President Sirleaf, for a really remarkable conversation this evening. President Sirleaf, we are so grateful to you for your long-standing commitment to the work of the Clinton Foundation. You have been a participant in a number of CGI gatherings over the years and been a terrific partner and a real leader of rural development and health work. And we are especially grateful that in the final month of your presidency, you made the time to come all the way to Little Rock, Arkansas, to the Clinton Center to participate in our Distinguished Lecture Series. Thank you. And finally, a very special, heartfelt thank you to the Kumpuris family for establishing this lecture series, for your generosity and for your friendship. We are all the beneficiaries of your tremendous gift. Thank you all.